My name is Lauren Verno. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications for OnDefend, and I am here to be your moderator of Reimagining Ransomware Defense, revealing and removing the hidden risk of security control failures. Joining us today, two experts in this industry, which is really fun, but we have James Case. He is the Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, for Baptist Health Jax. And then you have Chris Freedman, CEO of OnDefend. Guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah. So, James, can you tell me a little bit about your background? Obviously, Baptist Health right now, but give me a little bit of your background.
Yeah, how far back do you want to go? I was born, I know.
On a
Right.
Tuesday.
Yeah, I'm in my 4th year as a CISO at Baptist Health, which has been a super fun journey, partnering with the business and really leading really all the decision making around cyber. And then it really, as far as background, going before that, I spent 4 or 5 years at a Citibank as a security officer. So learned a lot there, working with global fraud, and got involved in a lot of attacks and then incidents. So learned a ton there. Prior to that, for 9 years, I was at Baptist Health as a senior project manager, leader, and then manager of InfoSec, and built the program. So interesting, like none of us have the same origin story, so that one's a weird one, right? I could have never mapped it out that way 20 years ago, but it's what happened, is where I am, and it's a lot of fun. It's crazy, a little scary, but fun.
I think, Chris, you could pretty much say the same thing about yourself as a co-founder of OnDefend.
A lifelong entrepreneur. I often joke, if I worked for me, I would fire myself, like, really quickly. I co-founded OnDefend with Ben Fink and Billy Steegs in 2016. We're an international security firm. We provide security testing and advisory services around the world. We are one of the only independent security inspectors that helps foreign entities prove they're safe to do business with in the US so they can have market access. We built a proprietary breach and attack simulation solution called BlindSpot that actually powers a new offering called Ransomware Defense Validation that we'll touch on today.
I think that's the perfect segue into our roadmap for the day. You have to always start with the problem if you're going to talk about a solution. So we're going to dive a little bit into the ransomware pandemic, but don't worry, we know we don't have to go that far into it. Then we're going to take a look at some security control challenges and failures, take a look at that. Then, of course, as Chris mentioned, ransomware defense validation. And then we know the proof's in the pudding. We're going to show you some real results from an actual healthcare system. Now, something I do want to note is we are going to have polls in between, so make sure you're staying active and answering those, and then we will leave some time at the end for questions and discussion. So as we're going and as your questions are popping up, go ahead, throw them in the chat. This is a 45-minute webinar, and I will make sure we stick to that time. So I think we start off with the ransomware pandemic, specifically in healthcare. James, I really don't think I have to show you these stats because you live these stats every day. Talk to me a little bit about, from your perspective, what ransomware within the healthcare system means.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of places and ways to go with this, but right. So that slide, or the content behind that slide, is one that I present to my board of directors on a regular basis. And it serves as a kind of foundation of a pulse, right, from a government agency, what they're seeing of the reported. And I guess that leads into one point. These are the reported incidents, right? There are probably plenty of companies, hopefully not hospitals, but companies that don't report them, right? So of the reported, these are staggering, results of kind of what we're dealing with from a pandemic perspective. To use that terminology, as far as ransomware is really bad, and especially bad with healthcare. So yeah. So again, I think this frames it up quite succinctly on kind of the issue, the challenge, and what we have ahead of us to try to reduce.
Yeah, I think also, if I could add in, Lauren, with the entry of AI and the escalation of it more recently, the volume of these are going to increase, right? I mean, ransomware as a service, right? It would take ransomware developers months to even years to develop basically software, right? Which is ransomware. With AI, they can build it within days and weeks. So just the sheer volume coming at us is going to increase.
Right.
Also, just most of these start, right, James, with a phishing attack, right? Some way of doing that. And you used to be able to tell the syntax of someone talking to you, like, oh, that's not the person. And then they improved, and then we started using AI tools and SEGs to like identify that. But now the bad guys are using AI. So it's an AI on AI war. So it's hard to win this battle. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's going to get a lot worse, isn't it, James, in your
And
mind?
yeah, and one more point, you said a second ago that is in my next draft board update, and that is that the bad guys are using AI, and so I'd say the barrier to entry, right, to use that kind of terminology, has lowered. So now it's easier to hire these ransomware as a service and perform these attacks. So that increases the volume and the amount of attacks, right?
Yeah. And then, I mean, I think at the end of the day, seeing these numbers, that's one thing, but it's the impact that it has on the everyday person. And James, we've talked a lot. We've talked to a lot of healthcare CISOs about these major impacts. I know for you, patient safety will always be number one.
It is, yeah. I mean, that's one good thing that when we have our cyber tabletops at Baptist and our CEO even attends most of them. And I love in every one of them, right? He centers us in what we're doing and the purpose around, around the whole safety of our patients, right? That's why we're there. So I love that every decision we make during an incident or during preparing for an incident and practicing, it's focused on the patient. So right on. And then I would say after that, or those other things, right? Reputation and trust are certainly vital, but if force ranking these, patient safety is number one. Yeah, data loss. Yeah, that's a huge risk, right? That's near the top of my risk that I, present to the board of directors and audit committees and enterprise risk management, and then financial and impact and downtime. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, to me, these sum up kind of the heart of the top risks that we're tracking, at our health system, and most of my peers, across the country.
Yeah.
And it's probably why you engage the top employees in the world, right? And the best security controls available to you on the market, right, James?
Yeah, we can't solve every risk, right? That's something that I've made clear from my first day back, for 3.5 years ago. Can't solve every risk, but we're going to try to solve what we can and prioritize and where we can try to get the best tools, and we normally do. But it doesn't always work out, right? Because money is always a factor, right? There's no money tree, right? So we have to fit within the budget, and but yeah, so it's important to have the best tools we can have to find the risk and reduce the risk and help stop these attacks.
Yeah. Chris, I think you guys both mentioned it right there. Technical security controls. I think that flows perfectly on this. I mean, focusing on ransomware, where do you start? It's so overwhelming. So it really is starting with your technical security controls. As Chris mentioned, we work with plenty of clients that, you invest in best in class, but we all know that there's common challenges that come with
Mhm.
putting in those technical security controls. So James, I'm going to kind of let you focus on this one. The first one, operational assurance that your controls are working.
Yeah, I think that bullet or sideways bullet, however that's working, is at the heart of what RDV and ransomware defense, like a validation is all about, right? How do we ensure, to kind of use it, comment Chris has, said many times, it's like ADT checking all your doors and windows, right? So how do we make sure that the controls are working? We know they are because we see alerts and errors and we have investigations, but how do we validate it from a test, perspective to make sure it's working as efficiently and effectively as we expected, and that no changes were made or upgrades were made that maybe broke something, right? So yeah, so that's a challenge, right? Which again is at the heart of the why. So yeah.
Yeah. And then the next one, and again, these are all we've talked to multiple security leaders from around the country, and these were what they told us their biggest challenges. How do you even quantify how well your security tools are doing and your response times with your outside vendors? I mean, that's it. Putting a time on that is important. I mean, ROI, it's just kind of impossible if you're not validating.
Yeah, each of our tools we try to have this, but we don't, without or like, before RDV, right? We didn't have anything that went across and provided that consistent view on validating and then quantifying so we can track our progress. Have we slid backwards? Why? And how do we bump it back up? Yeah, so it's a problem and across the industry, and excited RDV can help with that.
Or
Yeah.
even really James, I'd even add to that, like sometimes doing bake-offs between tools sometimes, right, to figure out which one's the best for you. So many variables associated with quantification here. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I can go there now if you want, but that is a good
No,
example that over the past year when we were making tool changes, it was nice to have RDV as a player to look at that, kind of consistency and see if we were going up or down, if we were sliding backwards or making progress. So yeah, that's a good point.
I think the industry as a whole is doing a little bit better on this next one. There's obviously a long way to go, proactive versus reactive. I mean, I always hear by the time the FBI is knocking on your door, it's too late. So how do we avoid that? And that is validation.
Yeah, I think that number three right there, and again, it's great that this list is framed up this way, right? It's one of the key things that's at the heart. You've heard me talk about many times offline over coffee or whatever, that what are we doing to be proactive and what are we doing maybe more than our peers, right? We want to make sure that we're doing what we can, so our board members can have confidence that we're doing everything we can. Again, we can't boil the ocean, but what are we doing to make progress and be proactive? And if there is an incident down the road, we have this evidence of things that we're doing above and beyond to try to lower risk, right? So that's kind of all my thoughts on that. But
Yeah. And then I think we can quickly go through these next two because they kind of go hand in hand. You spend a lot of money on these tools. I mean, cybersecurity is it's not a cheap game, and you need to justify your spend, and then you need to justify that spend to the board, and you also need to show your preparedness. I mean, James, I'm sure you have, how often do you have these conversations?
no, right. It's almost ROI-ish, right? But not exactly. But yeah, so what is the effectiveness and is the investment worth it? And maybe, again, look into other tools, and if they can be just as effective at half the cost, then we have and we'll continue to make those changes to lower our budget because we don't have unlimited budget, right?
Yeah.
James, one question, if I may. Do you ever get asked about specific threat actors, like after an event happens, like from the executives, like, oh, are we ready for that? That happened to this other system?
Yeah.
Does that happen? Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of number five, right? That kind of hitting on.
General.
Yep. Yep. No, good point.
So that kind of just leads directly into our first poll question. So let's go ahead, let's launch it. I feel like this is always the funnest part of the webinar is getting to launch these polls. So which of these concerns that we just showed you resonates with you most? Is it that operational assurance, quantifying security tool, proactive versus reactive, justifying security investment, and demonstrating preparedness? I'm going to challenge the two of you. I know that's saying which child is your favorite, but what would you guys say?
James first.
Well, number one, I think that's why it's number one, right? That what are we doing to make sure things are working as expected? Because just because we know we set them up that way 6 months ago, what is our extra due diligence we're doing to make sure that they're still operating that way? So
I feel like the second one and the third one, or the fourth one rather, second and fourth one, because I often, as a business person, I want to justify an ROI on what we're doing. And a lot of times you have to look at your vendors to do that, right? Is this one providing enough juice for it to squeeze? So I feel like 2 and 4 are related. So I'm going to cheat and pick 2.
That is so cheating, but that's okay. Let's go ahead. Let's close out the poll, see what everyone else said. All right. It looks like, it's a tie between operational assurance.
29% had the right answer. Okay.
James is like, there are no right answers, but there's a right answer.
Right.
All right, let's go ahead and let's move on. So I think we've kind of hit on it. Technical security controls, we need validation. Okay, but why? What goes wrong? Chris, you can definitely attest and talk about this because really we have a bunch of different defenses in depth, and you've kind of narrowed it down to a few that we've really identified as crucial.
Yeah, we've been testing people around the world for many moons now. So security email gateway, if you don't have one, gosh, you sure should. And you hope that it's filtering malicious emails. But, what if it's not? Why is it? Like, doesn't it not? And so if you look at these lists here, there are filter misconfigurations. It could come out of the box that way. Misconfigurations happen dynamically. Somebody could change a policy or a rule. There could be an issue with them systematically. There are new tactics to evade these things. That's what the adversaries do. And then not many people think about the tool provider themselves creating a negative impact. They could change a feature within the tool and render a policy, ineffective. So there's more, but this is some examples. And if you go to the next slide, I mean, to think about how often it happens, when we were doing testing around the world, 24% of the time we were bypassing. Now, this is not a crazy number if you think it might be, because I mean, even Microsoft does an annual Gone Fishing tournament, and it ends up being around this number. So this is real, a real problem.
Yeah, James, do you have anything to add? I mean, I'm sure that number doesn't shock you.
No, I agree. And there's never any kind of perfection, right? So it's always going to be greater than 1% or 0%. But no, I think based on what I've seen over the past years, that seems in line.
Yeah. All right, Chris, threat detection failures.
Okay, well, again, people like James' leadership have bought the best security tools, and you hope they're detecting attack and alerting some team member to the attack. But, why don't they sometimes, or maybe often? Well, these failures is very similar, right? Misconfigurations, unintentional control changes, right? I mean, James, how often has happened where you're not quite sure what IT is doing, right? They may have a change control policy or something like that, and they may do something, and something may change in your environment, and you wouldn't know until an adversary found out for you. So these things are scary. The tactics are evolving. The tools are trying to keep up, but they can't always. And then obviously, I mean, the CrowdStrike thing wasn't this, but it happens all the time where a EDR changes something and it renders a detection rule ineffective, right? Adversarially affecting it. So, I mean, this is the problem. And if you go to the next slide, us doing testing, we've found 7 out of 10 times when we do an attack simulation, we find exploitable security gap, whether it's a misconfiguration or a control change, 70% of the time. So this is why the attacks are successful out there. The threat response. Oh yeah, we're gonna go to threat response failures.
Yeah, sorry, I clicked on that a little too soon, but I think let's go to threat response failures.
Absolutely. Okay, so you have your own internal SOC. You have possibly an external MSSP or MDR, NDR provider. They're not cheap, right? You're hoping that they're responding in real time to real world attacks, but how do you know they're not? And when they don't, why? Well, the reality is they don't, and I'll show you the second slide why, how often that is. But again, if a tool fails, right, they're not going to be able to respond, but it's skill and resource limitations. Remember, these entities are becoming more and more commoditized. So you may hope they have eyes on glass, but often they're using algorithms to do the eyes on glass. It's not necessarily always humans. So their communication breakdowns, whether on your side or their side, all kinds of things. And when we were doing tabletop exercises, and we started simulating attacks during those tabletop exercises, and we were finding customers, MDR partners, were not responding over 50% of the time. I mean, how much money is going to these groups, and they're not responding either within the SLA requirement or expectation or at all. It's scary.
I think it's a little foreshadowing, by the way, of the case study results. I mean, it goes to show you that this ad is completely accurate.
Right. So yeah, that's what we see.
Yep. So this kind of just leads to the question, are your controls working right now?
Yes.
Which is our next poll question. And I want to, James, you to tie in here. So how do you know your security controls are functionally working right now? Do you do vuln scanning? Do you do penetration testing? Or do you really not know?
Yeah, and it's interesting, James. Remember we were with a group and we asked the group, and quite a few of us like, I don't know on a consistent basis, right? Some of them thought pen testing did it, but some of them even thought, well, we audit. And well, auditing just tells you that the thing is there. It's not telling you that functionally working is an important part, the functional part, right, James?
Yeah, we need more options on this question, right? Because vulnerability scanning isn't going to do anything. Penetration testing's, get you maybe halfway there. Yeah, so it definitely needs more questions like RDV is the answer.
I think you're jumping ahead, which I do appreciate. I know. Listen, I appreciate it. All right, let's go ahead. Let's show the results. James, you get an A+ for that one. Okay, pen testing. And of course we know pen testing. James, how often within your peers, how often are you guys pen testing? Not just, you don't have to, I don't want to call Baptist Health out, but in general.
I would say the industry average is 1 year, once a year now, but there are different types, right? And so we certainly do internal, external, and web-based, all different types, social engineering pen tests. So But in general, I think the industry average is one overall pen test per year is pretty common.
So, I mean, Chris, I think that goes, we talk about this a lot. Is traditional testing enough?
So we're a penetration testing company. This has been our bread and butter. And when we were doing it, we were seeing these control failure points. And let me try to explain where pen testing stops, what pen testing is. So when a pen tester comes in, it's their knowledge base of doing the things they're comfortable doing in your environment during that time period. And as you can see on that image right there, they're going to do the MITRE ATT&CK kill chain of what they know to do. And when they're attacking you towards some goal, they're going to tell you on the device level what was stopped and what was not stopped. If it wasn't stopped, there's a vulnerability that needs to be patched, right? What they're not necessarily going to tell you are, if it's blocked, did anyone see it? Anybody responding? And then if it wasn't blocked, holy moly, are we resilient? Is anybody going to respond quickly? So if you go to the next slide, this image is where, really, in our opinion, where a penetration test stops. This is the rest of the game. This is your detection alerting pipeline. These are companies' investments. So you can see the security tools, you can see the SIM and the consoles where the alert's supposed to fire, and you can see the outcomes that you should be looking at. And there's control failures, right? The little thing with no evidence, the tool misconfigurations, everything goes in that bucket if it's just missing to begin with. The tool control changes happen from time to time. Carbon black, maybe firing and detecting alert, firing an alert, it's going to its own console, right? That's where it's at. It's not at the SIM where everybody's looking. Or maybe it takes hours or even days, sometimes we've seen that, due to ingestion issues, to fire an alert in the SIM. Well, the attack is over. These are blind spots, and this is why we created that breach and attack simulation tool called Blind Spot, because our Fortune 500 customers asked for this that we were initially working with. Simulates attacks, and it validates the defenses are working. And just real quick to give an eyeball view of what we do here with this is we've not defanged anything. We've rebuilt exactly what these types of threats would do in your environment, and we make it industry specific because every industry is different. They have different threat actors attacking them. So this was what we had built and we're going to market with, and this is what James had called me about when we made this whole new concept, Lauren.
Yeah, so this is the perfect segue into, you've heard James say it quite a few times, ransomware defense validation. So I think what is so amazing about this service and solution is that it came from actual conversations with security leaders like James. Talk to me about how this became what it is today.
Well, James, you called me, right?
Well, it was over coffee or something, but yeah, I mean, it was, again, it goes back to the word validation, right? If I had to pick one word, what are we doing to validate? How can we validate? What can we do more to validate? And so, yeah. 100%.
Yeah, James, when we started talking, because James knew we were building this thing and it was serving sort of the Fortune 500, and you were talking about these concerns with you and other leaders we met with. And remember what you said, it's like, I don't need another tool. I want to protect my team's bandwidth. I want a managed thing coming. I want humans and a tool, right? I believe that's what you said. And so,
lighter lift way to do it versus just one more tool to deploy and manage and upgrade and work with. And then, so it's a light lift. Like the goal is a light lift for us as a customer, but you get the full value and all that monitoring as far as validations.
yeah, so that's how it was created. We can just take you through quickly what it is. So obviously we're emulating attacks on the gateway. We'll talk more about it, but the goal is to prove it's effectively filtering malicious emails, not reaching employee inboxes. Emulating attacks on the tools to prove they're detecting and alerting your team. And then obviously emulating events to make sure that you're responding and resilient. So those are the three sets of what we're testing on a consistent basis. The gateway, if you go further, the gateway, we simply just need, right, James, a sample inbox to throw emails at, right? We're emulating malicious payloads. We're also looking at your spoofing configurations, SPF, DKIM, DMARC, with the goal of like, all right, is this prevention effective, and is the vendor the right vendor? The next one, this is where we put blind spot licenses, endpoint licenses on a sampling of endpoints that are representing the controls, usually like 2 to 3 or 4 are enough. And we're going to emulate specific threat actors that people like James want, right? That they're concerned about, their board's concerned about. And we're going to prove that they're prepared. We're going to look at the mean time to detect, because no one really consistently knows what their mean time to detect is, but that sure is important. And then obviously vendor efficacy as well. And then the response teams, right? We're paying a lot of money for these third parties. We also have our internal team. Let's test them. Let's see how resilient we really are. And then let's get our mean time to respond time. So to me, to have your mean time to detect, the mean time to respond on a consistent basis is really neat. I think that's a really neat thing to visualize, and that's something that, James, we all kind of thought we should create.
Yep.
So that's what OnDefend put their eyes on. So I would just add one more thing, James, real quick. You asked for, I just want to make this note. You asked for, I need to protect my team's bandwidth. We have priorities, right? Not just this.
Mm-hmm.
So we worked really hard to make this like really easy. So it's like an onboarding of this whole thing is like 2 hours, right? And then the consistent, like I think most companies like to do this on a quarterly basis, just because you got to remediate and you want to test and retest and do the next thing. So the time for groups, like James and other providers is about 6 to 8 hours a quarter. That's the team's time that it takes on average. So that's really, I think that the juice for the squeeze is good, time versus the value. So we work really hard to do that. And then obviously get this kind of rate for this thing, like could be buried in a pen test. Like our goal is to make this really accessible, Lauren.
Yeah. Efficient. Yeah.
So that's what it was designed.
I think that is, what better way to showcase this and to show some results. So I do want to say this is not Baptist Health's results. This is not James's. So James can only speak a little bit to it. But what we did, again, we've rolled this out into select healthcare systems around the nation. And we've worked with them to see what this looks like before, going to the masses. So James is going to offer some background because he can attest to what this looks like. But let me take you through really quickly the customer, the challenge, and how we got here. So just like, pretty much every healthcare system, it serves 1 million+ patients annually. And a lot of these healthcare systems have a children's hospital. And, we're not going to say one is more important than the other, but of course, little lives. The challenge was, of course, needing that quantitative proof, everything we talked about. And then we implemented ransomware defense validation. So this customer, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, they decided to do it on a quarterly basis. So we picked 2 quarters of testing to just kind of show you the before and after and give you a little taste of what this really looks like and maybe what you think is happening versus what's not. And then James, I want you to kind of take us through your thought process as a security leader when you see these before and afters and what this means. Sound good?
Yes, ma'am.
Cool. All right. So Chris, tell me a little bit about this first exercise.
Yeah, I like to thank the system for, being excited about us presenting this kind of data because I think we're all in this together. So kudos to them. Okay. So in this one, first quarter, overall, we emulated 655 emails with malicious payloads. Again, we analyzed the SPF DKIM DMARC settings, right? And that's what we did against that sample inbox. And this was the first results, right? Not too far off that stat that you saw, right? 22% were delivered to the inbox, okay? There's room for improvement there. The spoofing settings, 0 findings, and the SIG provider notified them that, hey, there's some activity here, which is, that's good, right? So that's an average result. After the remediation direction we provide and assistance, boom, delivered to inbox 3%. Much better. That is much better against these advanced tactics that we're emailing through them. There was a setting, I think it was related to a quarantine issue or whatever. I forget exactly what this one was, but either way, the point is these things pop up, right? That's why you do this on a consistent basis. The SEG provider notified again. So that was
like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. At least it's more forward than back.
Well, yeah, things are changing, right? These are dynamic environments. So again, I just like to say, again, this is a journey, not a destination. That is security, unfortunately. So that's just part of it. But yeah, improved to 97%. And again, regarding that journey, now we're going to keep emailing those malicious emails, but we are getting advanced tactics adding onto that every month, right? So the next one might be 800, 1,000. We're going to keep increasing that, adding new tactics and techniques that would bypass filters. So yeah, it's exciting, ongoing.
Yeah, James, from a security leader perspective, seeing that difference, first of all, what is happening behind the scenes? And then also, what does this mean to a team to see these improvements?
Yeah, it's good to have quantifiable data, right? Because our tools don't really give us this perspective and this view. So it's great to have an objective tool that can be consistent to give us things like this, to show where we're doing. And again, as we make tool changes, how does it look? And as new threat actors come out or like new TTPs, is it catching them, right? So it's about that continuous improvement as well.
All right, let's go to threat detection testing.
along the same trust but verify vein, the threat detection tools. The customer wanted 3 specific threat actors. It was Conti ransomware, Black Basta, and the Nobelium, the old supply chain threat. So we emulated those. Q1. Now, when we do this, again, what we do is we set thresholds of what you would expect it to, block, alert, and log. Look, you can't block everything, so we set viable thresholds. Based on that, these were their scores. Now, these may seem bad visually, but honestly, they're not uncommon. But that Sankey diagram, that visual of the threat detection pipeline, you can see a lot of no evidence. So there's a lot of visibility issues into their pipeline. So
Again, these aren't emails. These are files that are executed on an endpoint to see if they're blocked or like detected, right?
Yeah, this is the tools, right? This is the blind spot endpoint license on multiple endpoints, and we're emulating real world threat activity to see if it's detecting, blocking, alerting, or just logging. We're analyzing all of that to see how they can be optimized to get those scores up and to get visibility into that pipeline.
Yeah, this is where you're leveraging that tool as a managed service.
Right.
That's right. Yeah.
Is Nobelium an older one? I'm just curious, like understanding that data, like why that one would be higher than the others. Is Nobelium older or?
Yeah, I can't speak for exactly what they're. Yeah, this is one of many customers, so yeah, I'm not sure, James. I'll set you up with the leader yourself. You guys can talk it through.
We'll set you up with the SE later who ran this project. But let's talk about the Q2 results.
Yeah, so much improved based on those thresholds. Honestly, that's an average of 93%. Above anything above 90%, you're kind of a diminishing return. So at that point, we're like, all right, let's go on to other threat actors that you're concerned about. But the next thing is the visibility of the pipeline is absolutely the key. So I was very, very excited. We were very excited to have that. You can see like they only had an EDR going to the SIEM. Look, they got a lot more telemetry coming in, plus the NDR, right? Let's go get more tools and data sources into that SIEM. So this was a 93% average improvement. That's great. That's where they're at. The next stat is what I'm excited about particularly. Additional events logged 51, additional alerts triggered 48, additional attacks blocked 22, blind spots removed 121 total, but 4 new detection rules created. This is what excites us, right? You're creating new and advanced rules to catch advanced attack activity to make sure your EDR and SIEM are optimized. So excited about that.
James, is there a difference, a true difference in simulating an actual TTP on your network versus, kind of pretending it like we do in a tabletop exercise?
Yeah, no, I think the answer is definitely yes, right? It's actually hitting it with the real thing, like defanged to some degree or rebuilt in a. But yeah, I think a tabletop certainly is normally just conversational, right? So 1,000% it's a huge difference. But even a pen test wouldn't necessarily hit all these different types of tools and give this sort of analysis, and it certainly wouldn't be consistent over time, right? It'd be 1 year at best.
Yeah, and a pen test, again, it wouldn't be able to tell you like we are ready for, if you were concerned about Nobelium or Conti, it wouldn't say 1-to-1 we are ready for that. So yeah, I agree.
All right, threat response testing.
Yeah, so we emulated a loud incident, again, using blind spot, right? We should expect a response, a timely response. So this entity had an NDR and a couple MDR providers as their vendors. They didn't test their internal SOC team. They were focused on the vendors. So as you can see on this is the first, the NDR you got, sorry? Oh, thought I heard something. On the Y-axis, you have time of response. On the X-axis, you have the validation tests. The dotted horizontal line is their SLA requirement. So as you can see, the NDR just made it. The regional, or this is the national EDR that's also an MDR, 96 minutes. They're way over the 30-minute expectation requirement. The regional MDR, which is a good regional MDR, they didn't call. They didn't notify. So that's a major problem, okay? So after direction from all of us, the NDR solution improved. Honestly, that's just thing. Get your eyes on our glass, right? Let's go. Let's focus on us, not everybody else. So that was a good improvement there. The national EDR, MDR, it turns out it was a call tree issue, right? Which isn't exactly the EDR, NDR, MDR's fault. But that's why we do it, because things are changing in your environment. The regional, the last one on the far right, the regional MDR solution, they were late. So they missed it and they were late. That is a business case to rip and replace. And that's exactly what happened to make sure they had a better vendor in place.
Wow.
Yep.
Harsh.
Yep. And I'll let you chat in a second, but overall, if you just click the button, 21 minutes is what they can start proving their mean time to respond is. And so I think that's a critical thing to show. In my mind, James, I'm not a security leader, but to the board or whomever, like
Right.
we have this kind of response capability. If
I
and
mean,
when
James,
anything.
And I think the
James,
bigger
you
part,
said wow. That was your first response is wow. Oh, take me through that.
no, just yeah, things like this. Wow. But I think the bigger part, I mean, to where like Chris was going is for the board and senior execs showing this over time, right? Like a one-time thing's great, but show me, then the real value comes in over time. And then I guess maybe one day, being able to benchmark against others, if there's a way to abstract this across an average as this service grows, right? That's one idea.
Oh, you mean like healthcare institution to healthcare institution? That is
Well, not
exactly.
one-to-one, but like an aggregate of like 10 or 20,
Yes.
right? So,
Well, again, I've heard the following things over my lifespan. It said, I want to show the board I'm ready for this. I want to prove an ROI, other things. But the other thing I've always heard is like, I want to know exactly how I'm doing against my industry peers. And
right.
so
Yeah.
as we accrue more and more national, or maybe international customers, we definitely want to do that. We can show like, here's how you're doing against your industry peers in general. And so that, yes, James, that's a goal of ours. For sure.
Cool. Right.
Thank you for that.
All right, so we go back to this value versus challenges. This is going to look familiar, but operational assurance. I mean, the whole point of this is validation. James, I mean, have you seen a change in your system even for this number one?
Yeah, I would say from our testing and our results, we've seen, I think we sleep better at night, right? Versus just waiting to see an alert and go, oh, I guess it worked, to doing an intentional test in a consistent manner to validate that it is working.
Yeah. Quantifying security tools. I mean, you're able to actually validate the SLA requirements versus the response time. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. I think that's my catchphrase for the day.
It's that last slide, right? But again, showing it over time, I think is where the real value comes in. But yeah.
Proactive versus reactive risk reduction. James, something I love that you always say is you can't eliminate all risk, but you can reduce it.
Yep. All we can do is all we can do. But again, I think number 3 highlights the giant example of, I would say, going above and beyond, right? Most people aren't doing this, right? That's why you invented it. So I think people taking advantage of things like this, even if it's not this, finding ways to take advantage of things like this, right? To get out ahead, to do the extra due diligence, have that layer of validation, right? Again, validation, validation, validation. So
You said there's one thing, I just want to jump in, James, that caught my ear is that going above and beyond. I do love that because your compliance says you have to do that. I imagine the board, everybody, we just got to comply, but then showing above and beyond. God forbid if something did even happen, like you're like,
yeah.
we have it above and beyond what is required. I just can imagine being in a CISO's position, how valuable that'd be. So thank you for keying off on that. I'm going to remember that.
Yeah.
Clearly justifying security investment gaps or needs. Yeah, we've definitely had clients that have changed tool vendors, Chris, after we've done some of these tests.
Or bake-offs, and then sometimes so we did a project for the whole country, Qatar. And one of the major Qatarian entities was begging for tools from the board. And when you had that big no evidence in that Sankey diagram, the board was like, what is all this red? And he's like, well, the investment I've been asking for. They immediately got the investment before the World Cup, and they didn't get breached during the World Cup. So I think that's empowering for leadership.
That's pretty cool. And
yeah,
and you played a role in that, Chris.
Yeah, I was like, we can now talk about that. We cannot talk about that at the time. That's the hardest part with cybersecurity. You can't really talk about some of your wins, but that's what makes it so great. I really do think this one is just so important. It's being able to show it not just to your executives and board, but I mean, just in general, to be able to showcase it. Numbers, people love numbers, people love data. You can't argue with it. I mean, James, I'm sure it must be so hard to showcase the value other than, well, we haven't been breached today. Like,
right.
no, like here's actual.
No news is good news, right? So
yeah.
I always hear from the providers like, okay, the board asked us about some competitor of ours got breached, and they say, are we ready? And they were like, well, I have these pen test results, James. Like, there's some findings and there's some remediation directions. So we're doing really good, and that's like really ambiguous.
It scratches the surface, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's definitely one of the things we tried to solve to here for sure.
All right, poll question number 3. So we're pretty much re-asking the same question, but now that you've seen all this, how confident based on this are you that your controls are functionally working right now? There are, I mean, the product's called blind spot for a reason. There are plenty of blind spots we're all unaware of. So confident, not sure, and I'm rethinking a little bit about my first answer. James, not to call you out, but do you think you've had some aha moments within your own system when you
Yeah.
do these kinds of tests?
Yeah, from as our testing was going on, definitely, right? I mean, again, it gets me closer to that number one. Am I confident? I'm way more confident than I was a year ago, right? Again, there's still no perfection, and as Chris said a while ago, it's a journey, not a destination. But what are each of us doing with our controls to raise that visibility and do that validation? Again, the word validation is just if I just sum this whole thing up, it's that one word.
I feel like we should have more options, like confident, I'm semi-confident, I'm really confident.
I know. We can yell at the poll maker later. Let's go ahead. Let's look at the results really quick. Let's see. I'm
Right.
rethinking. Yeah. I think the majority of people have definitely that we've gotten feedback from. That's what.
I thought we would have gotten at least one confident, but somebody's saying, "Oh, hey, we're good."
Yeah, someone, somewhere. So we have about 4 minutes left. I want to go ahead. If you have any questions that you want answered from these two, drop them in the chat right now. I'll monitor that. But overall, guys, any big takeaways from the thought process? James, when you are building your security system and you're looking to reduce risk, operational assurance, sleeping good at night, all those, phrases, where do you start and why are you, kind of preaching this validation method?
I don't know. It solves a problem, right? How do you know if you're ready? Like you've said it 10 times, or how do we know we're ready? How do we know it's working? I haven't had a good answer to that, but with your partnership, we've been slowly, or we've found a way to really answer that question and on a regular basis and in a consistent manner. And then I'll say two other things. One, this also hits on continuous improvement, right? It's not just validation, but it's also improvement. How are we adapting, right? And adopting to those latest threats and technologies. So those are kind of key points, I think, on top of the just validating that things are working.
I'd also add that I think it's important for organizations to share with each other these gaps, right? To provide awareness even to each other. Right, James? I mean, a lot of times it's close to the vest with this stuff, right? Whether it's a corporate policy or just the person themselves. But I think as the industry allows for to be more open about this, I think it'll be very important for, we're all in this together. Let's improve together. So
Yeah, transparency is, I think, important.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, speaking of transparency, big shout out to the healthcare system that allowed us to do this case study with them. It really is awesome to show that. Yeah, no, we're very thankful. And if you go ahead, you look in the chat, you'll actually see a link to go download this case study, so you can see the study. So you can see the results and kind of is in the chat right now. Team, thank you so much. I mean, it is always such a pleasure to talk to you too. And it's always fun. I mean, and James, thank you for your candor and your openness when talking about, just how the healthcare community is affected by, these threat actors.
I do have one more thought we haven't hit on that I want to bring up, and that is cyber insurance, right? So this is something that I shared with my cyber insurance in my most recent renewal, and we got a and we got a rate reduction. Now I had several things that I put on there, but this was one of the big ones that I put in there. So again, it goes back to that above and beyond. What are we doing more than our peers to lower risk from an investment perspective, from an energy perspective, from a really trying to mature? And so I think to me this was an example that set a good example for that cyber insurance renewal, and I think made a key difference.
I'd like to give you kudos for that because most people just show the auditor or the insurance auditor like what they must show, the normal stuff, right? But the above and beyond that you were talking about earlier, you can show that and get discounts, which was pretty amazing. I'm glad to see they're doing that.
Yeah, I always do. For the past 2 years, I've done a here's what you didn't ask. And I have, this year was a 19-page PowerPoint on here's what you didn't ask. And one of the big items was this.
Love it.
So,
Love it.
Love it.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. If you do want to follow us on Twitter, or I should say X, LinkedIn, YouTube, go to @OnDefend or OnDefend.com. But for now, team, thank you so much for joining us for Reimagining Ransomware Defense. Have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thank you, Lauren.
have a good day.
Bye, guys.